Denmark mourned, but the grief was short-lived. The late king was scarcely cold in his grave when the bells tolled not for sorrow, but for celebration. His brother, Claudius, had taken the throne and with unseemly haste married the queen, Gertrude. Prince Hamlet, the departed king's son, remained cloaked in a darkness deeper than the Danish winter. The court buzzed with a false gaiety. King Claudius, a man of calculated charm, addressed the assembled nobles, his words smooth as silk, promising stability and prosperity. But beneath the veneer of royal pronouncements, a serpent of unease stirred in the hearts of many. On the ramparts of Elsinore, a chill deeper than the November air gripped the watch. Horatio, a scholar and friend to Hamlet, stood alongside the guards, Marcellus and Bernardo. Their unease was palpable, born of rumors and whispers that had been circulating through the castle. "Last night of all," Marcellus began, his voice hushed, "when yon same star that's westward from the pole had made his course t illum that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one, peace, break thee off," Bernardo interrupted, pointing a trembling finger. "Look where it comes again." A figure materialized from the shadows. It was armed cap a pie, its visor raised, revealing a face chillingly familiar. The spectral form of the late King Hamlet stood before them, his eyes filled with an unearthly sorrow. Horatio, a man of reason and learning, was shaken to his core. He had dismissed the guards' tales as drunken imaginings, but now, confronted with the impossible, he could only stammer, "By heaven, I charge thee, speak." The ghost remained silent, its gaze fixed on some distant, unseen horizon. It was a sight to curdle the blood, a violation of the natural order. The guards, paralyzed by fear, could only watch as the spectral king slowly faded back into the shadows. After the ghost vanished, Horatio, his voice trembling slightly, urged the guards, "This bodes some strange eruption to our state. We must tell young Hamlet. He alone might understand the meaning of this apparition." Hamlet, lost in his melancholy, was startled by Horatio's arrival. The news Horatio bore was almost too fantastic to believe. The ghost of his father, walking the battlements at night. "I saw him once. He was a goodly king," Horatio recounted. "He wore the very armor he had on that day he overcame the ambitious Norway. When he frowned, it was as if he would cleave the very earth." Hamlet listened, his heart pounding in his chest. If what Horatio said was true, the world he knew was a lie, and a darkness unimaginable had taken root in Elsinore. "I will watch tonight," Hamlet declared, his voice resolute. "If it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace." The shadow of Elsinore had fallen upon him, and the course of his life was forever altered. The chill of the Danish night clung to Hamlet as he wandered the castle gardens, the scent of decay heavy in the air. Grief, like a venomous serpent, coiled tighter around his heart with each passing day. A biting wind swept across the battlements as Hamlet and Horatio kept watch. Talk of apparitions had spread through Elsinore, whispers of a king returned from the grave. Hamlet, skeptical yet disturbed, sought answers in the haunted night. A figure materialized before them, wreathed in mist and sorrow. It was the ghost of Hamlet's father, the late king, his face a mask of frozen anguish. The ghost spoke, his voice a mournful echo carried on the wind. He revealed a tale of betrayal, of poison poured into his ear, of a brother's treachery that stole his life and his crown. Claudius, the ghost declared, was the serpent in the garden, the architect of his demise. His smooth words and lust for power masked a heart black with sin. "Revenge my foul and most unnatural murder," the ghost commanded, his voice fading into the night. Hamlet, his heart aflame with fury and grief, swore to avenge his father's death. But doubt, like a creeping vine, began to ensnare Hamlet's resolve. Was the ghost a truthful spirit, or a demon sent to tempt him to damnation? Could he trust such a spectral claim? The weight of the ghost's demand pressed heavily upon Hamlet. To kill a king, even a treacherous one, was an act that could stain his soul for eternity. Could justice truly be found in revenge? Hamlet resolved to test the ghost's claim. He would feign madness, a mask behind which he could observe Claudius, to see if guilt betrayed the king's carefully constructed facade. His feigned madness began to take its toll. He turned away from Ophelia, his beloved, knowing that his charade would wound her deeply, but believing it necessary for his plan. Claudius, though outwardly concerned, watched Hamlet's erratic behavior with growing suspicion. The king's unease was a small victory for Hamlet, a sign that his performance was having the desired effect. The shadow of Elsinore deepened, and Hamlet knew that his path was fraught with peril. Whether the ghost spoke truth or falsehood, he was committed to uncovering the truth, whatever the cost. The court of Denmark watched with growing unease as Prince Hamlet's behavior grew increasingly erratic. His words were a jumble of wit and madness, his actions unpredictable. He was a shadow of his former self, a haunting specter moving through the halls of Elsinore. Polonius, ever the busybody, wrung his hands, convinced he held the key to Hamlet's affliction. "He is mad for thy love," he declared to Ophelia, his voice laced with certainty. "It is the very ecstasy of love that drives him to this distraction." Ophelia, torn between her duty to her father and her love for Hamlet, felt her own heart begin to break. His affections had been replaced with rejection, kindness with bitterness. She became a prisoner of his madness. Claudius, sensing a deeper motive behind Hamlet's madness than mere lovesickness, summoned Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, childhood friends of the prince. "I did send for you," he confessed, "that you might gather, so much as from occasion you may glean, whether aught to us unknown afflicts him thus." Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, eager to please the king and regain their former favor, readily agreed to spy on their old friend. They arrived at Elsinore with false smiles and honeyed words, their true purpose hidden beneath a veil of camaraderie. Hamlet, however, was not easily deceived. He saw through their false friendship, recognizing the king's hand in their sudden appearance. "My excellent good friends," he greeted them, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How do you both?" "Were you not sent for?" Hamlet demanded, his tone turning sharp and direct. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, caught off guard, stammered and hesitated, their discomfort betraying their true intentions. Forced to confess, they admitted their mission. Hamlet, confirmed in his suspicions, knew that he was surrounded by enemies, and his path to vengeance was fraught with peril. As if by providence, a company of traveling players arrived at Elsinore, seeking the king's patronage. Hamlet, always drawn to the theater, saw an opportunity to use their art to expose Claudius's guilt. He greeted them warmly, and devised a plan to stage a play mirroring the events of his father's murder, hoping to provoke a reaction from Claudius that would confirm his guilt beyond any doubt. The players, captivated by Hamlet's passion and the intrigue of his plan, agreed to cooperate, unaware of the dangerous game they were about to play. Unbeknownst to Hamlet, Claudius was watching, his suspicions growing with each passing day. The game of cat and mouse had begun, with the fate of Denmark hanging in the balance. Hamlet, driven by the ghost's revelation, concocted a scheme. He would use the theater, that mirror of life, to reflect Claudius's crime and thus trap his conscience. The play, The Mousetrap, was to be his instrument of truth. With a show of feigned madness, Hamlet approached Claudius, requesting the royal players to perform a play of his devising. Claudius, suspecting nothing, granted the request, seeing it as another symptom of the prince's unraveling mind. Hamlet meticulously instructed the players, ensuring every gesture, every line, mirrored the events of his father's death. He sought a precise and damning reenactment, a theatrical dagger aimed directly at Claudius's heart. The stage was a humble affair, a raised platform upon which the players, with their painted faces and exaggerated movements, would enact their story. The audience, a tapestry of courtly finery and common garb, hushed in anticipation. The pivotal scene began. A king, slumbering peacefully, was approached by a villain who, under the cover of darkness, poured poison into his ear, a chilling echo of the ghost's tale. All eyes were fixed on Claudius. At first he watched with detached amusement, but as the scene unfolded, a subtle shift occurred. His brow furrowed, his face paled, and a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Ophelia, seated beside Gertrude, watched the unfolding drama with growing unease. Hamlet's erratic pronouncements and Claudius's visible distress painted a disturbing picture. The climax arrived. Unable to bear the mirrored truth any longer, Claudius bolted from his seat, his face a grotesque mask of terror and rage. "Lights! Give me light!" he roared, halting the play in disarray. For Hamlet, Claudius's reaction was confirmation enough. The ghost's words were vindicated, his suspicions confirmed. The mousetrap had sprung, and Claudius was caught within its jaws. Later, Hamlet found Claudius alone in the chapel, kneeling in prayer. The king's words were fractured, his soul wrestling with the weight of his sin. Opportunity knocked. Hamlet raised his sword, ready to strike the killing blow. But a thought, a chilling calculation, stayed his hand. To kill Claudius while he prayed, seeking absolution, would be to send him to heaven. Was that true revenge? With a sigh of despair, Hamlet lowered his sword. "Now might I do it, Pat, now he is praying, and now I'll dot. And so he goes to heaven, and so am I revenged. That would be scanned. A villain kills my father, and for that I, his sole son, do this same villain send to heaven." He turned and walked away, leaving Claudius to his false prayers and himself to his tormented thoughts. The path to revenge remained clouded, shrouded in the fog of his own making. Hamlet, his grief and rage brought to a boil, storms into his mother's chamber. His purpose: to confront Gertrude about her hasty marriage and perceived betrayal of his father's memory. Queen Gertrude, startled by Hamlet's sudden entrance and fierce demeanor, shrinks back in fear. Unbeknownst to her, Polonius, ever the loyal spy, hides behind the arras, eager to eavesdrop on the tense conversation. Hamlet unleashes a torrent of accusations, his words laced with bitterness and pain. He berates his mother for her betrayal of his father, painting vivid images of their loving marriage and contrasting it with her current union. Behind the tapestry, Polonius, caught up in the heat of the moment, makes a slight sound, betraying his presence. Hamlet, suspicious and on edge, believes the noise is Claudius eavesdropping. Without hesitation, driven by the assumption that Claudius is spying, Hamlet draws his dagger and plunges it through the tapestry. A muffled cry echoes from behind the tapestry as Polonius falls, mortally wounded. Gertrude screams, realizing the horror of Hamlet's impulsive act. Hamlet pulls back the tapestry, revealing the lifeless body of Polonius. The realization of his mistake washes over him, replacing his rage with a chilling sense of dread. Hamlet stares down at Polonius, a wave of remorse crashing over him. He understands the gravity of his actions and the inescapable consequences that will follow. Suddenly, the ghost of Hamlet's father materializes, his spectral form a chilling reminder of the unfinished task. He fixes Hamlet with a stern gaze, urging him to stay focused on his primary goal, revenge against Claudius. Claudius, upon hearing of Polonius's death, feigns concern while secretly plotting Hamlet's demise. He summons Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his former schoolmates, and tasks them with escorting Hamlet to England. Under the guise of a diplomatic mission, Hamlet is sent away to England with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, unaware of the deadly secret they carry. Claudius, alone in his chamber, seals a letter addressed to the King of England. Inside, it contains a chilling decree, the immediate execution of Prince Hamlet. The wheels of fate are now set in motion, carrying Hamlet towards an uncertain and perilous future. The salt-laced wind whipped across the deck as the longship, the Serpent's Kiss, strained against its moorings. Hamlet, under the watchful eyes of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, embarked on a voyage ordained by Claudius, a voyage ostensibly for his health, but whispered to be a journey to his doom. The political currents between Denmark and England were ever shifting, a dance of uneasy alliances and simmering resentments, making Hamlet's dispatch all the more ominous. Confined to the ship's dank underbelly, Hamlet, fueled by suspicion and a desperate need for truth, discovered Claudius's treachery. The king's sealed letter to the English court was a thinly veiled decree. Upon arrival, Hamlet was to be executed, a cure for Denmark's supposed unrest. The words, dripping with venom, confirmed Hamlet's darkest fears. Justice, or perhaps a twisted form of it, took root in Hamlet's heart. Under the cloak of night, he meticulously altered the king's decree. With steady hand and a chilling calm, he replaced his own name with those of his erstwhile companions, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Let them, unwitting pawns in Claudius's game, bear the brunt of his malice. The heavens themselves seemed to conspire, unleashing a tempest upon the North Sea. The Serpent's Kiss was at the mercy of the storm's fury, its timbers groaning, its sails torn to shreds. It was during this chaos that fortune or fate presented Hamlet with an opportunity. Amidst the storm, a pirate ship emerged from the swirling mist, its intentions as dark as the thunderclouds above. A fierce melee ensued, a desperate clash of steel and will. Hamlet, though a prince, fought with the ferocity of a cornered lion, his life hanging in the balance. Overwhelmed by numbers, Hamlet was taken hostage. Yet even in captivity, fortune favored him. The pirates, it turned out, were more interested in ransom than bloodshed. Sensing an opportunity, Hamlet negotiated his release, offering information and promises of wealth in exchange for safe passage back to Denmark. He was dropped off on the coast. Washed ashore on the familiar shores of Denmark, Hamlet, weary but alive, began his trek back to Elsinore. The sea had cleansed him not of his grief but of his naivete. He had stared into the abyss and emerged with a hardened resolve. He had a mission. Denmark and England danced on a razor's edge of diplomacy and distrust. England, a rising power, eyed Denmark's strategic control of the Sound, the narrow strait vital for trade routes to the Baltic Sea. Claudius, seeking to solidify his reign, had sought favor with the English court, promising concessions in exchange for their support, a strategy fraught with peril for Denmark's sovereignty. Back in Elsinore, Claudius, believing Hamlet to be sailing towards his demise, basked in a false sense of security. News from the coast confirmed the Serpent's Kiss had successfully set sail, carrying with it the perceived threat to his throne. Yet, beneath the veneer of triumph, a nagging unease persisted. He had not accounted for Hamlet's cunning or the fickle hand of fate. While the court celebrated Hamlet's supposed departure, Horatio, ever loyal, remained vigilant. He refused to believe in Hamlet's madness, suspecting foul play. Each day he climbed the ramparts, his gaze fixed on the sea, praying for his friend's safe return. He sensed the darkness gathering over Elsinore and knew that Hamlet was the only one who could pierce it. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, upon their arrival in England, were met with swift and decisive action. The English king, bound by the sealed decree, carried out the orders without question. The two courtiers, oblivious to their fate, paid the ultimate price for their blind obedience and their betrayal of Hamlet. Hamlet, now hardened by experience and fueled by a burning desire for retribution, set his sights on Elsinore once more. He would return not as the melancholy prince, but as an avenger. The game, he knew, was far from over. It had only just begun. Ophelia, adrift in a sea of madness, sought solace in the natural world. The flowers, once symbols of love and remembrance, were now mere playthings for her fractured mind. Her songs, once sweet and melodic, were now fragmented echoes of a lost innocence, a stark reminder of the darkness that had consumed her. The weight of her sorrow, the betrayal by Hamlet, the death of her father, all pressed upon her delicate soul. In her madness, she sought a connection with the weeping willow, its branches mirroring her own tears, an attempt to adorn it with her fading beauty. Fate, or perhaps the final act of a broken heart, intervened. The branch, weakened by time and neglect, gave way beneath her, plunging Ophelia into the cold embrace of the stream. Her garments, heavy with water, pulled her down, down, down. Her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like, awhile they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old lauds, as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. The news of Ophelia's demise reached the court swiftly. Claudius, ever the pragmatist, recognized the potential for political upheaval. The death of Polonius's daughter, so soon after his own demise, would undoubtedly stoke the fires of resentment. He had to act quickly to contain the damage. Laertes, summoned from France, arrived consumed by grief and righteous anger. The news of his father's murder and sister's descent into madness had ignited a fire within him. He stormed into the throne room, a whirlwind of fury, demanding answers and retribution. Claudius, with practiced ease, attempted to soothe the enraged Laertes. He acknowledged his grief, feigned sympathy, and subtly deflected the blame, weaving a tapestry of half-truths and veiled accusations. Gertrude, ever anxious, watched with trepidation, fearing the consequences of Laertes' wrath. The king, now alone with Laertes, skillfully guided the young man's rage. He subtly painted Hamlet as the sole cause of their misfortunes, a madman who had destroyed their family. He promised Laertes justice, but a justice of Claudius's design. Hamlet, returned from his perilous journey, watched with Horatio as the preparations for Ophelia's funeral unfolded. A wave of sorrow washed over him, a profound sense of guilt and loss for the woman he had once loved, now lost to the madness he had unwittingly fueled. The priest's words echoed in the cold air, a stark reminder of mortality. The societal views on suicide during the medieval period were harsh, and Ophelia's funeral rites were somewhat abbreviated, reflecting the uncertainty surrounding her death. The church considered suicide a sin, and full honors were often withheld. Overcome with grief, Laertes leaped into the open grave, embracing his sister's lifeless body. His actions were a desperate attempt to hold onto the last vestiges of their bond, a final farewell to the sister he had lost. Hamlet, witnessing Laertes' display of grief, could no longer contain himself. He stepped forward, revealing his presence and confronting Laertes, setting the stage for further conflict and tragedy. What is he whose grief bears such an emphasis, whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars and makes them stand like wonder-wounded hearers? This is I, Hamlet the Dane. The air hung heavy with the scent of upturned earth. Hamlet, returned from his ill-fated voyage, found himself drawn to the churchyard, a place where life's grand drama inevitably concluded. Horatio, ever the steadfast companion, remained close to Hamlet, his presence a silent reassurance amidst the prince's turbulent thoughts. The gravediggers, oblivious to the prince's presence, continued their work, their coarse humor a jarring counterpoint to the solemnity of the place. Their jokes were dark, focusing on the futility of earthly ambitions. Hamlet approached the gravediggers and picked up a skull, turning it over in his hands. The skull once housed thoughts, dreams, ambitions. Now it was an empty vessel, a stark reminder of mortality's inescapable grip. "Alas, poor Yorick," Hamlet murmured, recognizing the skull of the king's jester. "I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy." Horatio watched, a familiar sadness tugging at his heart. He knew the depths of Hamlet's grief and understood the prince's fascination with the macabre. A mournful procession appeared on the horizon, the chanting of priests carrying on the wind. It was Ophelia's funeral, a spectacle of grief and loss. Ophelia lay in her coffin, her delicate features serene in death. Flowers, once symbols of her innocence and beauty, now served as a final tribute. Laertes, consumed by grief, threw himself into the grave, embracing his sister's lifeless form. His cries of anguish echoed through the churchyard. Hamlet, unable to contain himself, emerged from his hiding place and leaped into the grave, confronting Laertes with a furious challenge. "What is he whose grief bears such an emphasis?" he cried. A fierce struggle ensued, the two young men grappling amidst the earth and sorrow of Ophelia's grave. Their grief had turned to rage, their words to blows. Claudius, ever the manipulator, stepped forward, attempting to restore order to the chaotic scene. Yet, beneath his veneer of concern, a sinister plot continued to unfold. Claudius, ever the serpent in the garden, finalized his treacherous scheme with Laertes. A fencing match, seemingly honorable, would be their stage, and a poisoned blade their weapon of choice. No room for error, no space for mercy. Fueled by vengeance for his father and sister, Laertes prepared his instrument of death. The poison, potent and swift, promised a fate most cruel, a fitting end, he believed, for the Prince of Denmark. And, unaware of the treachery brewing, Hamlet felt a strange premonition. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud obscuring the already dimming light of his life. He could feel his doom approaching. The stage was set. The grand hall buzzed with anticipation. The court of Denmark, oblivious to the darkness lurking beneath the surface, gathered to witness a spectacle of skill and honor. Before the duel began, Hamlet, burdened by his past actions, sought reconciliation. He offered an apology to Laertes, acknowledging his role in Polonius's death, hoping to cleanse his soul before the impending storm. The duel commenced. Steel clashed against steel, a deadly dance of skill and vengeance. The fate of Denmark hung precariously in the balance, each parry, each thrust, a step closer to the inevitable tragedy. In a gesture of motherly pride, Gertrude raised the goblet, unaware of the deadly brew within. Her love for Hamlet, ironically, would seal her fate. The poison coursed through Gertrude's veins. A scream escaped her lips as she realized the horrifying truth. Claudius, his carefully constructed facade faltering, could only watch as his plan spiraled out of control. Laertes, seizing his opportunity, struck with venomous precision. The poisoned blade pierced Hamlet's flesh, delivering not only physical pain, but also the chilling certainty of his impending demise. As death crept closer, Laertes' conscience stirred. He confessed his treachery, revealing Claudius's role in the deadly plot, a final act of atonement before succumbing to the poison's embrace. With newfound purpose, Hamlet seized his moment of vengeance. He lunged at Claudius, the poisoned sword finding its mark, delivering justice, swift and final, upon the usurper king. As Hamlet breathed his last, Horatio cradled his friend, his heart heavy with sorrow. He vowed to carry Hamlet's story, to ensure that the truth would prevail, and that the world would know the tragedy that had befallen the House of Denmark. The Queen's death was the first strike of the bell, tolling the end for Elsinore. Hamlet, realizing the poisoned wine was meant for him, now saw the full extent of Claudius's treachery. Laertes, weakened by the poison on his own blade, looked at Hamlet with a newfound clarity. The venom worked not only on his body but also on his soul, purging it of vengeance. Claudius, his machinations exposed, found himself cornered. The crown he so desperately sought now felt like a burning brand upon his head. He had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Hamlet, fueled by grief and a lifetime of indecision finally cast aside, struck with the poisoned rapier. The blade found its mark, delivering justice with brutal finality. Claudius, the architect of so much misery, gasped his final breath. His reign, built on deceit and murder, ended in a pool of his own blood. The throne of Denmark was once again vacant, but at what cost? With his last moments fleeting, Laertes sought redemption. He confessed his part in Claudius's plot, and in a final act of grace, offered Hamlet his forgiveness, finding peace in the face of death. The poison, swift and merciless, began to claim Hamlet's life. He knew his time was short, and a desperate urgency filled him. Horatio, ever the loyal friend, cradled Hamlet in his arms, his heart breaking with each ragged breath the prince took. He knew he had to be strong, for Hamlet's sake. "Tell my story, let the world know, the truth." Hamlet's words faded into a final sigh. The Prince of Denmark was dead, his quest for vengeance fulfilled, but at a terrible price. Horatio, now the sole voice of truth, stood as a beacon of integrity amidst the devastation. He swore to keep Hamlet's memory alive, to reveal the corruption that had poisoned Elsinore. As the dust settled, Fortinbras, Prince of Norway, arrived with his army. The kingdom of Denmark, weakened by tragedy and devoid of a clear heir, was ripe for the taking. Order would be restored, but under a new banner. And so Horatio prepared to tell the story of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, a tale of revenge, doubt, and the fall of a kingdom. A tragedy that would echo through the ages, a testament to the destructive power of ambition and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The shadow of Elsinore would forever linger.